Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Internet Dragons TV. In this episode, we're actually two-manning with myself and Joe because we're talking about what, at least to me, has definitely become my favorite new game franchise. Dead Space was in the running, but that's kind of tripped a bit near the finish line here. But we're, of course, talking about Assassin's Creed. And unfortunately, Roger's not joining us on this cast because while he owns every single one of the games, I don't think he's played one yet.
I think that is entirely accurate. I really don't think he has actually played one. He keeps meaning to, though.
They made Steam for him, clearly. Just the siren call of sales. He is completely helpless, and hey, that's how Gabe's putting his kids through college, I guess.
I don't know. I'm waiting to see if Roger is going to go ahead and buy that new Steam console. I think he put all of his games that he'll never play on it.
I think it would be perfect.
That's right. I'm talking about you, old man. Bring it.
All right. Anyway, back to topic. Yes, we're talking about Assassin's Creed, specifically Assassin's Creed 3, which came out last year, but we'll be touching both in the past and in the future because that's why I decided to bring this together. As we got some great news last week about the game that I know has me very interested. What about you?
Yeah, seeing that trailer hit for the first time, it excited me in very interesting and scary ways.
hmm So, what is it exactly about Assassin's Creed that you enjoy so much, the franchise as a whole?
It has very solid storytelling. That's one of the key things for any franchise that has to hold my attention, right? And Assassin's Creed has done that for the most part. It's a compelling story, and it also sings in a weird way to my history major aspect, because a lot of people don't know that I dual majored architecture and history. I know, come a weird way from that.
Planning on designing the Parthenon there, tough guy?
If you never know, but it was always interesting to me to see a lot of things, particularly, believe it or not, about like the Templars and things like that, and what they were to history. And it was always something I was interested in. It was always something that I whenever I was doing European stuff, that I sort of paid attention to, and was always I was that geeky kid that had that romanticized idea of knights and whatnot. But seeing Assassin's Creed take that in a completely different direction, but while at the same time staying, believe it or not, mostly historically accurate for the surrounding events, is phenomenal. Because a lot of games don't do that. A lot of games kind of eschew any sort of reality for whatever they have to substitute their own world into. But the Assassin's Creed universe doesn't. It all took place in our time stream, with just slightly different things happening or slightly different events occurring in the background or underneath. So it's kind of cool to see that. It always drew me into the series as a result.
See, for me, it's similar, though not so much the actual historical aspects. I've always been a huge fan of, the various conspiracy theories and just all the crazy crackpot stuff like you see with, the Templars and the Assassins here. And
Hmm.
not that I put any stock into those crazy theories. I just love hearing about them. And, the weirder it is, but you dig down and at its core, every single one of those crazy theories is based on something true. And that's where, those types of things really interest me. And then as we saw the series play out and they started bringing in like the ancient race and stuff like that where
Hmm.
it's same thing. I love watching like the ancient alien show on TV just because it's so completely weird, completely out there, completely ludicrous, but there are so many things that are based in fact that are kind of too weird to be true on their own. And bringing all that together into a game series and then adding cool characters and fun gameplay on top of that, that is really what cemented this game for me. It's like the Assassin's Creed. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. Ubisoft permitted their designers to do anything they wanted in these games,
Yep.
and it's so over the top so frequently, but it works so well as a whole.
And that's sort of an important thing to note too, is the freedom that the developers had to pursue the project really shone through in a lot of the games, because they weren't, super strict on what they could and couldn't have. And so we got some very unique gameplay, very unique characters, very unique voicing of characters, and those unique twists, which are just absolutely awesome.
So coming through the franchise, we started off in the Middle East, moved into Italy, and of course, as much as people joked about how they were just rehashing Assassin's Creed 2 over and over again with the sequels, they actually made the game better each time as well, and made it interesting and something that I know I had to play. Even though I always had this sort of rule for myself that I would never buy a game series that came out with a new iteration every year. And Assassin's Creed was so good, it got me to break my own rule in that regard. Like even like when Brotherhood came out, I was like, "Oh, I'll play it, but I'll pick it up for cheap." I had it a month later. Revelations
Hmm.
came out, I was like, "All right, I'm seriously not going to spend $60 on this game right away." Oh, it comes with a free T-shirt. Okay, I'm in. So it didn't take a whole lot of convincing for me to jump into these games.
Well, and that speaks to the caliber of the game too. Like, I mean, I had a similar rule, but again, this is a series that made me throw it out the window after getting my hands on Assassin's Creed 2 and realizing, like, I was like, damn, okay, well, this is good. Okay, then, well, I'm done. And just I was there at the midnight release for every single other one that came
Set up
out.
that automatic $60 deduction in your bank account every year.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much.
So when Assassin's Creed 3 starts off, we find the story in a really interesting place because over the course of the previous four games, we've seen Desmond, the modern day assassin, learning about his history, learning about the assassins, and searching for a way to save the world from its huge catastrophe in 2012. Glad we dodged that bullet.
Yep.
And it leads them to this cave with this crazy ancient technology.
Ah, the cave in Turin, New York, which is not too far away from me, actually. I'm not kidding.
I believe you, and that's what's so great. Again, takes that nugget of truth and just expands upon it in great, fantastic ways. And so, of course, to find the clues they need to get this ancient machine up and running that's going to save everybody, got to dive back into Connor's memories, or Connor, jeez, Desmond's memories again.
Ah, well, of
And this
course.
time we're not,
Sorry.
we're not going back to the Renaissance. We're actually going back to the American Revolution, which on its own is such a fascinating time period to be in. And Ubisoft went and threw us another one of their fun little twists. Every Assassin's Creed game has had this weird twist nobody saw coming, but it worked so well for the game. And leading up to this, we saw, all the press was about, you're playing as Connor, this Native American character and this and that. And yet we start off as this English dandy named Hatham Kenway, who completely stole the game for me.
He was a very, very interesting character, and his opening sequence was cool too, because what's the most important thing he does right at the very beginning?
There's several.
Well, I mean, to me, he murders an assassin at the London Royal
Hmm.
Opera House, right? And it sort of like sets the tone for his character because it's like, here's this dandy, but holy shit, he's actually a badass.
You wouldn't often see, a British nobleman climbing across the opera house, and like that whole thing was like so ridiculous. I'm like, this dude, like all anybody has to do is look up, and then I realize, well, it's England; they don't look up.
England, the guinea pigs of the social world.
But of course, Hatham makes his way over to the New World in the West, in America, and he starts playing out, his role there of trying to find the cave where Desmond now finds himself and gathering his allies. And all throughout this whole opening sequence, by the way, this cast is going to be completely full of spoilers, so this
Oh
is
yeah,
your last chance.
the game's been out long enough. If this is spoilers to you by now, either you don't love the series and you had no intention of playing, or you're Roger.
So things just seemed a little weird, and I knew the twist was coming. Like I saw it coming, but I was like, there's no way they could actually do this, and yet they pulled it off and revealed it the whole time. Hatham was not an assassin despite his use of a hidden blade. He is actually an agent of the Templars. And it was so great, when the game first came out, seeing everybody who didn't see it coming freaking out over the plot twist. It was great stuff.
Well, and that's the cool thing about that, right? Because it's not something you expect, the Templars to do. You don't expect them to employ agents of, that type of fighting at all. You don't. They're sort of the up to this point. they were sort of the bruisers, right? They're sort of the guys that just kind of charge in. That's their thing, like victory through strength. Not this, which is really really intriguing.
And not only that, but Hatham wasn't a bad guy. He was a very likable character, and we saw
Hmm.
throughout his mission he was helping people along the way. The whole reason he found the cave in the first place is because he rescued an entire tribe of the native people. So that in and of itself wasn't something we would have expected from a Templar and really set a different tone for the rest of the game.
Well, especially when you consider that the Templars are painted as this giant evil controlling force from the past all the way up through the present. Yeah, it's not something I think anybody really kind of
Hmm.
anticipated. And the fact that he has that such depth of character in the short time that you see him at the beginning was amazing.
And I think that was also the game's biggest flaw is they made
Hmm.
Hatham such an amazing character and then took him out of the player's hands because the tribe Hatham saved, he ended up having a child with one of the women who would grow to be Connor, the actual main character of the game, the person we spend the most time in control of. And Connor is not a very interesting person. And there's been a lot of criticism on it, and it's absolutely true. But I think, at least for me, it worked because the events that were going on around Connor were so much more important than Connor himself. I think a stronger personality would have kind of diminished from that, at least for my perspective.
I disagree slightly. It suffered from what I like to call Symphony of the Night syndrome, where you start out uber powerful and awesome, and then everything's taken away from you. And doing that to players, even especially now, can be incredibly jarring. And it is, if you're not prepared for it or didn't expect it, is quite jarring. But I also think that Connor did need a bit of a stronger personality, especially when you compare what we were coming through from Assassin's Creed 2. Even Assassin's Creed 1, Altair had a stronger personality than Connor, in my opinion. And I understand that the events were important, but it shouldn't diminish from the character's role in those events. And part of that role in those events hinges on the character being interesting. Because otherwise, what the hell do you care?
I can buy that. Like you said, it's a point of contention, but I've seen so many people who just completely throw away Connor as worthless, where I gotta have trouble putting my finger on it. Like he could have been fleshed out a bit more, but I didn't completely hate that he wasn't.
Fair enough. I can see that.
So with this new setting and this new character who now has all this upbringing as an American Indian and has all of that characterization behind him, we got some interesting new gameplay elements out of it, and that is brilliantly explored through the entire frontier they've set up, which was easily my favorite part of the game, was just running around that forest. I spent hours, days just leaping through the trees, hunting down animals, stalking prey through the bush, taking them out with a well-placed arrow or even, my assassin's blade. I loved how they melded that aspect of the character in with the series core gameplay.
Well, it was also very important too because we're going from, um, and this is something that a lot of people are concerned about. You're going from the Renaissance in Europe, where there's a lot of these old, large buildings, and a lot of movement takes place there. And then you're looking at colonial America. Colonial America didn't really have that same sort of landscape. So when you're changing up the gameplay that much, you need to add sort of that fluid element, and his movement and his hunting and basically how he was in the forest was sort of that replacement for it almost. And it was very very engaging, and to my surprise, well, I shouldn't even say to my surprise, I should have expected it by now, was incredibly well done and incredibly fluid. Like the controls were very very tight, and I thought that was really really well done on their
See,
part.
and that's one thing I've seen a lot of people criticizing about the game is that the controls were simplified from previous versions. You didn't have to hold down 3 buttons to free run anymore. You didn't have to master the Tekken claw maneuver in order to actually be effective in combat. It was much simpler. They got rid of some unnecessary key bindings, and it flowed so much better. Like, oh, they're making it easier. They're making it, more for casuals. I'm like, but I've always been of the belief that, at least in these games, the combat should be simple and easy and fun because the characters you're portraying have that much more skill than their opponents. It's just like in the Arkham Asylum games. You're friggin'
Hmm.
Batman. If I'm Batman, I shouldn't have to do anything more than press one button to take down a thug. Like, so that's the concept I've always had with Assassin's Creed is as simplistic as the system is, I've always felt that it worked for the series.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? Like if you make it too complicated, people aren't going to play it because they can't play it. You simplify it too much, people are going to bitch about it. But the thing is I think at least in this game, I think they found a very good balance. I really, really do because the controls, while they were simplified, weren't to the point where I thought, that didn't diminish my achievements in previous games as far as I'm concerned. It actually made me want to continue to play this game, which is good because it wasn't frustrating. It wasn't I am throwing the controller up and throwing my hands in the air and screaming at the top of my lungs because I failed at this one crucial jump, like the timed run in Altair. Um, it didn't have that same frustration, which I'm okay with.
And it also didn't cause you to wear down your R1 button, which is handy.
Yes.
But and the animation quality really lends itself to that. They went above and beyond with the animations in this game, especially when you're running through those treetops. How seamlessly he moves from foothold to foothold, to swinging on branches, placing his weight in one point and jumping off at another. It was so seamless. I loved it.
They did a very good job with that. And like I said, it was that seamless, that fluidity of motion that really sort of helped them out with justifying the change in location.
And
So
And it's a good point that you made about how they needed the forest to be that alive and that amazing compared to the towns, because easily Boston and New York are the worst cities we've had in an Assassin's Creed game. Just because, like you said, Rome and God, all the other cities. Yeah, they
any European city compared to the New World at that point is, I mean, you're basically building hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years of architecture and building upon building upon building
a
versus
bunch of wood cubes
Boston.
at the time.
Yeah, it's basically, well, we cut down a forest and made a box. We're not gonna die this winter, yay! New York. So I mean, yeah, you can't expect it to be anything other than that.
And another really cool aspect that they put in with Assassin's Creed 3 was the changes to the stealth system. It wasn't so much about staying out of your enemy's line of sight anymore. There was a lot more dynamic ability. And this game right here blows away, anything Metal Gear Solid has ever done, because there's no
Hmm.
there's no convoluted controls, there's no, meters or anything. It's you're either hidden or you're not. And it's so satisfying to be sneaking right next to an enemy that I'm stalking and having them not notice me there. It was so fun.
The stealth gameplay was, like you said, it was a top-notch endeavor. Like it really was. It was more than I expected, which I think is kind of the important part, at least for me. Like I didn't expect it to be quite like that,
Mhm.
which is cool.
And in Connor's Voyage, he also came across another great character in the game, and that is Achilles Davenport. The original colonial assassin. And, again, this does kind of show just how bland Connor is, because he's been completely defined by the other characters in his life, being Hatham and Achilles. And again, I loved Achilles. Here's this old black dude, living on a plantation
Hmm.
out in the middle of nowhere, which in and of itself in the 1700s is a pretty big deal. And he trains Connor in the ways of the assassin. And this was like Mr. Miyagi, crossed with Obi-Wan Kenobi and any other awesome character, because I loved Achilles.
Achilles was a very interesting character, although I did halfway expect him at one point to say, "I'm too old for this shit."
Yeah,
Just get
yeah.
he had that sort of curmudgeonly thing about it every now and
He even
then.
had a little bit of Danny Glover in him too.
Hmm.
But and here you had really the big side project of Assassin's Creed 3, whereas in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and Revelations, you were building up your assassin forces and the villas and all the other stuff. Here you had to develop Achilles' homestead. And it was this great series of side quests. Did you actually do all of them?
No, I actually
Oh,
did not.
poor bastard. Because they were so fun. Like, it was taking the traditional Assassin's Creed stuff, but you're not running around leaping from rooftops murdering fools. No, you're herding pigs, or bring the doctor. My wife is going into labor. Fun stuff like that. But each of the residents of the homestead were unique, fun, and interesting characters, and seeing the community build up around Connor and around Achilles, the homestead itself became an amazing character in the game.
Which that's kind of interesting. I might actually go back and play those then.
Because especially like after you finish, the story mode of the game, you unlock a couple
Mhm.
additional homestead missions that brings Achilles' storyline to a close, and
Oh,
it's
really?
very well worth it. You learn more about Achilles' past, and the old dude, he finally kicks the bucket. So you see how that affects Connor, and it was very, very well done.
Well, then I know what my side project's going to be for the next couple nights.
Record some footage while you're at it.
Yeah.
So the homestead was cool. Of course, in with the homestead, we had the absolute best part of the game, and you know what I'm talking about, right, Joe?
I don't know. What are you talking about,
Come on,
Vince?
the freaking ship, the Aquila.
Yes, the Aquila.
Okay, how does Achilles own a ship?
Who the hell cares? It's Achilles who owns a ship named the Aquila. Fuck yeah.
And his group of privateers, they're not pirates, sailing the coastline and defending, the American people from the British and the Templars. And this was magnificent. I remember when they first showed this off at E3, I was like, "Oh man, that's kind of cool." But I had feelings of like the space combat in Halo Reach, where they made such a big deal out of it and it was a completely minor part of the game that probably would have been better off without it. But this was fantastic. The graphics were amazing. The gameplay was smooth. Like the ship actually steered like a ship. The combat was so fun, even though you're just looking over your shoulder and pressing a button.
Well, here's an interesting thing about the ship. I don't know if you saw the complaints about this online. There were some people who were actually getting seasick while playing on the ship. So that just speaks to the level of detail and attention that they gave to this part of the game. Because I personally have a friend who gets seasick very easily, but wanted to play the game and couldn't because he couldn't get past anything involving the ship.
That's great. And it was so fantastic and something I would not have expected from the game. It's certainly a lot better than tower defense like we saw in Revelations, or
Right.
checkbook management, or any of the other fun mini games they've thrown in there over the years. But did you also do any of the crafting?
Not really. Like my when I played Assassin's Creed 3, and this is different from any other time I played any other ones, due to real life time constraints, it was more main story, nothing else. Do what
Hmm.
I can.
The crafting was actually a pretty big misstep in my eyes. It was a completely convoluted process that you had to go through, gathering.
I heard it was largely unimportant
Yeah,
too.
there were maybe three things that I actually got any use out of, and the rest was just decorating my house. So, I mean, there was supposedly a great way to make money in the game was to craft goods and trade them, which was cool.
But you don't use your money for
Exactly,
anything.
the money in the game was completely useless because
Yeah, unlike the previous games, you're not paying off people or things or like. Okay, sorry.
not only that, there wasn't much in the
Go
way of
ahead.
equipment upgrades. The Assassin's Tomahawk you get at the beginning
Yeah.
of the game was seriously the best weapon in the game. I think at the
Mhm.
very end, like after the main story, I ended up crafting a sword that was slightly better than the Tomahawk. But aside from that, yeah, you had like your extra pouches for darts and arrows and stuff, which was handy. I'll give you that. But overall, it was way too time consuming for very little gain.
That's what I heard from a lot of people, so I'm glad I never bothered
Hmm.
with it.
But but that's what kept driving me to do the homestead stuff, because you needed to, as you did missions in the homestead, you would level up your crafters. So you needed a high level woodworker in order to get, a really fancy cart to send your goods into town. So it made me keep doing the homestead stuff in the hopes that I'd be able to make something cool. I just never could.
Oh, the sense of
It was
disappointment.
crushing. I mean, I have a bunch of Ben Franklin's inventions littering the mansion. I'm like, what am I going to do with these things? Yeah, they look nifty. So what? All right, but into the actual story of Connor himself. You're the big history nut, so I'm gonna let you lead with how they tied him in with the whole American Revolution.
Oh God, no! You should take a minute. Don't do that to me.
Okay, fine. So it's interesting the way they did it because, as we saw with Ezio in the previous game, Ezio was all up in pretty much everything in the history of Europe. I mean, I think he fought us alongside Napoleon. He put down, the Russian Revolution. Like he was everywhere. But Connor, he was always just kind of there in the story. Like he was an outside observer to so many of the things, and there were some points where that lended itself really well, like having him be the motivating force behind the Boston Massacre. Like he's the reason the whole thing set off, or being able to, oh God, what was it? Charlestown, was it the battle
Hmm.
where he's a third force alongside the two fighting armies? That was fantastic. Running through the battlefield, dodging the cannon explosions. That was, I mean, it was like Saving Private Ryan, except you're a freaking Indian with a bow.
See, that I liked. I did not like, in this from a history buff perspective, the whole he was the reason for the Boston Massacre. Like stuff like that. One of the things that I thought the other series did really, really well is that while the Assassins and the Templars were sometimes forces behind this, your character was never directly like the penultimate cause of something
Hmm.
happening, like a major event. He may be involved in the event, he may help bring it to a close, but the idea of having your character sort of be the reason a major history event like that occurred really was weird for me. And that's just, again, that's me, the old history major talking, but it was just weird for that. I kind of would have liked to have him a little more removed from that, I think.
What was awkward for me was Connor kind of standing around. You think somebody would have noticed the weird, Indian dude in the hood at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and
Yeah, it
like it was those small historical things that they just kept putting him in there, and I was like, that scene could have worked.
was like
Yeah,
photobombing.
that scene could have worked perfectly well without the Declaration of Independence. He didn't need to be there to be talking to John Adams and George Washington. And it was those little things like me, like having him, help out in the battles, and being at Valley Forge was so cool. Seeing all the American troops, huddled up in the cold, and George Washington just being freaking awesome. And they really made the historical characters accurate and yet at the same time larger than life, I think.
Well, which fits with the characters too. When you have people like, Sam Adams and George Washington, they have to sort of live up to what we've kind of built them up as far as history is concerned. Like these are, for lack of a better term, paragons, right? These are embodiments of ideals. Well, when they did them in this game, like you said, they made them sort of larger than life, but in a way that fit with what we have as sort of the American mythos of them. So like George Washington being this, amazing badass bastard fit because that's what we have for him as far as like a society's idea of him, which I think is
I'm
cool.
blanking on the name. What was the name of the commander at Charlestown?
Oh
Yeah,
God.
okay. Well, whatever his name was, he was freaking awesome. It was like Arlie Ermy in the in the American Revolution. He was, for like the 5 minutes he was in the game, he was my favorite person. And he was like Robert Duvall in
Ah,
God, Apocalypse Now, with the explosions going off all around, and he's not phased, he doesn't care. Like that was such an awesome character. But throughout all this, you had the interesting point of Connor really doesn't care about the American Revolution. Honestly, he
nope.
doesn't care what flag is flying over the building. All he wants is to make sure his people are protected. And that was an interesting aspect of, he really just backed whatever team best suited his interests.
Well, it also lends a new idea to the whole, like, we've had this pitted war, right? We've had this war where it's not just England and the Americas. It's been Templars and Assassins. So to see a character who, isn't just simply throwing his lot in with the exact opposition. There's a lot of gray lines in this game, right? There's a lot of gray areas where a lot of characters reside. Um, like I think it was it Daniel Cross, I think was the other one.
Yes, yes, we're gonna get to Cross in a bit.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of really, really interesting gray areas in this game that really weren't existent in the other ones, which was intriguing.
Hmm. So as this plays out, you see that Connor keeps trying to do what he feels is the right thing by helping out the colonials against the British. And at so many turns in the story, what he thought was the right thing to do actually endangered his people even more. Assassinating the land baron. It's like, well, we come to find out he was just trying to buy up the land to protect the native people. He wanted to protect that land, whereas the colonials just wanted to, build another box on top of it. So this all comes to a head in what was by far the highlight of the game, the team up between Hatham and Connor. We see the
Okay.
father and son together, and I loved that entire portion of the game because, well, first of all, it brought Hatham back into it, and we love Hatham, and seeing his interactions with Connor as Connor wasn't the enemy. Connor was just a young fool that Hatham was trying to sway, and Connor kept making mistakes, and you could see like Hatham was getting so exasperated, like when the prisoner gets away, and he just has that look on his face, like, well, are you going to chase him or not? Stuff like that. And the way they brought that story together of they really put I don't even want to say a gray area. It was just a giant question mark now over really who was the good guy in this whole game because not sure if he was telling completely the truth, but at least Hatham made a really good case that the Templars were kind of the good guys in this situation.
Which is interesting to think of too, especially when we've been talking about that a little bit earlier, where we've been so programmed through playing this game to just accept the Templars out of hand as the bad guys that it's sort of an interesting flip to have that sort of, well, first of all, such a strong character make that
Yeah.
argument. A strong, interesting character that you've grown to really like at this point starts talking about that, and you can't hate the character, so you can't just like, oh, it's this evil, maniacal, lies and perfidy. No, not so much. He's actually got some solid logical points, and it's like, well, shit, I didn't think of that.
Hmm. And after 4.5 games by this point of just being indoctrinated that the assassins are the right and the right, the Templar are in the wrong. All they care about is dominating humanity. And yes, that's true. They do want to be in charge, but ultimately someone has to be in charge or you get chaos
Mm-hmm.
like we see in the colonies, the Indian tribes being trampled in between these two fighting armies, whereas if we kind of just let Hatham do his thing, maybe a lot more people would still be alive. And I loved they put that doubt into Connor's mind.
Well, it's also interesting because it's one of the first, I want to say, glimpses of interest you see from Connor, because he's been pretty
Hmm.
bland. But to see that sort of question be raised and to see his pensiveness at it is good, I think.
Unfortunately, it was kind of ruined by the fact that Charles Lee, who was Hatham's second, turned out to just be a
Hmm.
monster in and of himself. Like Templar, assassin, colonial, British, it didn't matter. He was just a bad dude, and he was kind of the fly that spoiled the ointment, where he was the one that Connor knew needed to go, and yet Hatham still trusted him. So that's what brought everything to a point. And I think in the series the final confrontation between Connor and Charles Lee was one of the best climaxes we've seen.
Really. Well, I mean, when you're going against like the crazy Pope compared to this, I mean, sure.
The crazy Pope was still just a fat guy with a stick. So,
You're right.
but we chasing him through the docks and the collapsing, burning ship, which God, that was freaking tough. I don't know about you, but I had to try that about 15 times before I figured out where to jump.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about how many times I had to
Okay,
try
very
that.
well then. But the way it culminated with these two, beaten, bloody, half dead dudes sitting in a bar sharing a drink. Like
Hmm.
that was so like it was funny, but it kind of had that John McClane feel to it of just like this.
Die
Yeah,
Hard
this
2.
this is right. This is how it should.
Yep.
This is how the hero should look after a big battle. He's not going to come through with his hair waving in the wind, and his perfect white outfit still shining bright. No, he's going to get pretty jacked up. You just better hope the other guy's worse for the wear.
Yep. Which is cool, and it was a very. We've talked about this before, and I've used this very little lately, but it was a very cinematic moment, and I think that's kind of
Hmm.
cool.
And of course, we find out that through all this, Connor's people are still gone. They had to get away. So everything he was fighting for the whole time really didn't matter. He had to kill his best friend. His mother died. His tribe ended up having to move deeper into the woods, and presumably over the years they would be hunted down to extinction of themselves. So for all the good Connor supposedly did, really, what did he see out of it?
And that's sort of the weight that he'll have to
Hmm.
carry.
And that actually lends itself very well to the development of Desmond's story. And I've been the defender of Desmond for years now. People have hated this dude. I'm like, no, he's a stupid character. Yeah, he's a jerk. I don't want him around. Like I wish it was somebody else, but he's the character that can really elevate the series. He's the one who can carry it. Like
Mm.
I was still really hoping for an entire Assassin's Creed game set in the modern day. And
Which might still be
of
coming. You
course,
never know.
but and they came really close in a lot of the Desmond segments here of him scaling the building or the scene in was it a football game, some sporting event, or going after his father in Abstergo. Like they gave us
Hmm.
a lot of what we wanted, and I loved it. Like I kind of loved it and hated it at the same time because when you're playing as Desmond, they made the cool choice to completely remove the entire interface from the game. Like it was just you controlling a dude. There was no health bar, there was no weapon, there was no even the little flashing lights when the enemies are attacking. None of that was there. So you really had to apply what you learned from playing the game to controlling Desmond, which is kind of the whole meta thing that they're going on here. Whereas Desmond had to take everything he learned from essentially playing Connor and Ezio and apply that to his own real life. And they came so close to making something that worked. It just fell short.
Well, and there were some interesting hooks there, but you're right. I think it could have been done a little bit better, but it's still good to see that they've been building off of that because as the character has been around, as Desmond's been doing his thing, so to speak, he's gotten better and better and better and deeper and deeper and deeper. And his reactions to things are shifting. He's no longer the whiny bastard kid who doesn't know what the hell's going on anymore, who people just hated. He's actually starting to get some confidence. He's starting to get some insight. He's starting to learn from what's being unlocked inside of him. And it's cool to sort of see that transition over the series of
Hmm.
games. Like during the Assassin's Creed 2 arc, I really enjoyed the hell out of Desmond.
Well, especially because there were so many crazy moments. I mean, the whole storyline going on with Lucy, like that was
Hmm.
very unexpected. And we saw here they introduced another character to the game in Cross, who was a renegade assassin who is now working for the Templar. Did you understand anything that was going on with that dude?
Here's what I understand about Cross. He almost killed the Assassin's Order. He almost single-handedly, from what I got from everything that was talked about him, was responsible for the destruction of the Assassin's Order,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting.
See, here's the thing about Cross. Cross was actually the main character in the comic miniseries they did, Assassin's Creed: The Fall.
Really?
Yes. And that's why you kept seeing him breaking into Russian, because his ancestor, who was an assassin, was fighting during the Russian Revolution. It was a
Huh.
great comic series. Definitely check it out.
I'm gonna have to
And
because I didn't read it.
the thing with the whole with him slipping into the Russian was the artifact that Alexei had found was so powerful, like it kind of joined their personalities together across time. So like Alexei was actually having visions of the future at the same time as Cross was seeing the past. So it was some crazy stuff going on there. But it culminated with Cross being brainwashed by the Templar into joining the assassins. Like he was a sleeper agent the whole time until the moment where he met the mentor, and the mentor is of course the leader of the assassin order, and then he killed everyone. So
Yeah, the Great
yeah,
Purge, right?
so Cross was a freaking badass and a cool character, but and I love it when they bring characters from other aspects of the franchise into the games. But for someone who didn't read the comics, I have to believe that it was kind of awkward with everything that was going on. It was very jarring.
Well, there's I wouldn't say jarring, confusing maybe, but not jarring. Like it didn't take you out of the world, but it made you go, I definitely missed
Hmm.
something.
Like there should be something here, and I think that's one of the major storytelling missteps Ubisoft had here was they should have at least kind of mentioned it. Even have Sean send you a freaking email to read, like instead of just oh yeah he's a bad guy. There should have been something a little more intuitive to really bring Cross into the game because he seemed very alien uh, uh, from a gameplay and a storytelling aspect.
Yeah, I could see
Okay.
that.
So, of course, this now brings us to the end, where God, I'm going to keep doing that, where Desmond, has finally gathered, all the pieces of the Triforce and can now power up the ancient
The Master
machine.
Sword. Yeah.
And what was actually pretty cool, and I felt stupid because I actually missed this until about halfway through the game, was you could actually plug the batteries into the machine throughout the game. And I jumped all over the cave and I was like exploring. I'm like, okay, this is cool. I didn't know. I did not stand in the one right spot I needed to stand in to actually put the battery into the machine. So I got a whole lot of story all at once here. As you're activating the machine, you have Juno, this ghost from the ancient civilization, speaking to you and giving you all the backstory to this. And they really spent a lot of time developing the backstory of this ancient civilization. And I was really into it at this point. I was like, okay, this is freaking awesome. You have all these characters, and they were the height of technological advancement, and they still couldn't save their race. I mean, it's something we've seen a million times across various bits of sci-fi and
Sure.
fantasy, but it's never not cool, especially when you're giving it that ancient alien flavor of these were the gods that the early humans worshipped. And
Yep, like,
yeah, and as I said, personally, that's always something that's kind of interested me as just a storytelling quirk. So I was really into this. I was like, okay, now we're gonna find out what's on the other side of this force field. Like this is gonna be crazy. This is gonna be awesome. It's gonna be the greatest thing ever. I I have very conflicted thoughts about this ending, so I'm kind of gonna let you talk about it first while I still collect myself here.
Well, one of the cool things, at least I don't even know what the hell to begin with. Jesus.
Okay, so we find out that because in the Ezio games we were always communicating with Minerva, not Juno. Juno
Right.
was a character that really established herself here in Assassin's Creed 3. So at the very end, Minerva herself shows up and is like, whoa, 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 whoa. Don't do that. If you do this, you will release Juno. She's not a nice person. She was the evil one who was perfectly happy to wipe out all of the humans in order to save themselves.
Well, didn't Minerva say something about the conquest of the world
Hmm.
headed by
Yeah.
Juno? I think
Yeah,
that
Juno
was.
Juno wanted their civilization to rule over all of the others, whereas
Hmm.
Minerva and the rest of them didn't see the humans quite as pets as much as she did. So they wanted things to be a little more open, and it led to they finally had this solution, but at what cost? And they chose not to use it because they sealed Juno away, who was the only one that really wanted to use the solution because they didn't want to sacrifice everything else just to save themselves. But now here we are again in that same situation, and now Desmond is the one holding, the trigger in his hand.
What got me about this was sort of the Desmond had that weird. I don't even know what the word for it is. When Minerva shows Desmond that if the sun unleashes the power, that he would basically become this like uber religious
And I
icon.
thought that was awesome.
That was very awesome, but it was very. I don't want to say awkward, but it's like I don't even know how the fuck I would react in that situation.
Seriously.
It's like, okay, so if I do this, I basically become a god. Kinda.
But we find out that generations down the line, your teachings, being Desmond, who has become, the leader of the human race at this point, all 15 of them who are remaining, his
Kickstarts the cycle again.
and his teachings will become corrupted, and it all starts all over again, where what he set out to initially see as a good thing ended up turning bad and actually hurting the people he was trying to protect. Whereas the alternative would just be to let Juno out, and she would basically become, an actual god and rule over Earth,
The world.
but
Yeah.
everybody would be safe. Everybody would be happy. And right there you have the core concept of the Assassin's Creed franchise of freedom versus control. And which is the right one to choose? Do you choose the freedom to live your own life knowing that eventually chaos will come from that? Or control and submit yourself to Juno and just live that life out as best you can?
Or C, decide that you want to play God of War and decide that humanity is going to be better off what? Fighting against a god.
Which is pretty much what Desmond went with, because he realized he did not want, to be, the god, if you will, the mentor of the new race. And because he knew that eventually that would be the wrong path. So he chose to set Juno free in the hopes that in time somebody would rise up against her and humanity would, shake off their chains and go on with their lives. And that's what, like I said, that was very similar to the same concept we saw between Hatham and Connor, where Connor did everything he could in the name of freedom, in the name of giving people all these options. And at the end of the day, where did it get him? And I love how they made that storytelling parallel to Desmond, that he learned from Connor's experiences that the assassin's way probably actually isn't the best way.
Which is one of those epiphany moments where you kind of go, he can be taught.
So, but when we were talking, about the upcoming game, you said you hoped the ending would be better. What didn't you like about the ending?
It was too. I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. Like,
Use your
the
words.
wording here is a little weird. Yeah, no, it was like watching a Sunday sci-fi movie and getting that really weird ending where it's like it's cool, but at the same point you feel kind of cheap. Like I sort of expected a little bit more out of it than what we got.
Okay.
Although I did like the epilogue.
Oh yes, which we'll come back to. I will admit that it wasn't a very well executed ending. And it was too much people standing around explaining stuff to you, and instead of coming to these conclusions on your own. Like it was a whole lot of story that was just dumped on you at the last minute through exposition. And I do agree that was a very, ham-fisted way to go about it. But I still stand by that the actual concept
the content
and
was
the
cool.
story of the ending was very strong.
Yeah, I just don't like the idea of the cheesy sci-fi like scrolling text with a voice reading it off to you type thing. It feels like you cheaped out.
You see, I've seen so many people, both online and my actual friends who've played the game, saying that they felt that as a player we should have had the choice as to which ending to follow, but we're not talking.
That's not the type of game.
We're not talking Mass Effect here. At no point have our thoughts and our decisions as the player factored into Assassin's Creed story. Like it's been a ride from beginning to end. We at no point did we have any control over the steering wheel.
Which is an interesting parallel between us playing as the character and the people that are involved in the sort of the storyline going through their ancestors, right? Like it's the world on rails. And there's a definite beginning point and an end point that's already happened. We're just kind of playing through it. We are the vehicle through which we're sort of experiencing it. So I know it sounds really cheesy, but I've always kind of made that connection with the game where it's like me playing this game as if I was like in the Animus reliving this.
And they executed that so brilliantly over the entire course of the series. It was a very meta experience. Going back to the first game, because remember, going into the first Assassin's Creed, we had no idea about Desmond. every single bit of
Oh,
press was all about Altair, and you're living this guy's life in the ancient Middle East, and like, okay, this is awesome. And then right out the bat, at the beginning of the game, and it's something out of Star Trek going on here. You're like, who are these people? It was very disorienting, and I'm glad I didn't have it ruined for me because it was crazy and insane. And honestly, I was not on board with it until the end. After you finished Assassin's Creed and you saw Desmond
everything made sense.
activating the eagle vision and seeing the writings
Hmm.
on the wall, and that's when everything hit home of, my god, the scope of possibilities they have set up for this series. This could literally go anywhere, and it almost entirely did. And this is a series that could go on for generations and never repeat itself, and that is what I've always loved about Assassin's Creed.
Well, especially because it has the potential to go beyond the current day, right? Like, we don't know the point with which they have planned up to already. But it seems like they've got a pretty good idea of what they want to do.
I'm not so convinced about that. I think there's a certain amount of seat of their pants piloting going on here, but thus far it's at least worked out. So, so Desmond made his decision. Some people weren't happy. Again, I agree that it could have been handled better. We're kind of in that 2012 was the year of bad endings, of
Yeah,
things that had great concepts and really could have worked out well.
poorly executed
Needed a
endings.
little bit more time and planning.
A little bit.
But you mentioned the epilogue to Connor's story, which was very powerful as just a general statement, again, as to the entire concept of what they're doing here, right?
Well, there's a lot of symbolism in it too, right? Like the part where he's going through and taking the portraits of the Templar members, right? And he's burning them. And it's this very powerful symbolism because it's supposed to be like an end of a journey, right? It's supposed to be the end, the swan song. So he's sort of bringing that chapter to a close for himself. Like he's getting sort of an amount of closure, which really in most of these games the players haven't had. So it's kind of an interesting little twitch. Also, it's kind of interesting to see where he went back to his home village, right? And what does he find out while he's there? Well, you find out that the United States government, yay, has sold the land that his village rested upon to settlers to settle war debts. After everything he's been through, how the hell do you think that makes him
Mm-hmm.
feel? So now he goes to what? He goes to New York City and he watches the last of the British leave America for good. It also is the same part where he sees evidence of the slave trade starting to come in. And right next to the pier are the citizens cheering for the departure of the British at the same point that the beginnings of the slave trade is starting to really, really come in,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of a very powerful sign, symbol right there. Very powerful moment.
As what exact freedom was everybody fighting for if that's the end
Hmm.
result? And that was a very powerful statement that I I'm actually impressed they had the balls to go for. But they're Canadian. They kind of have that's what they do.
I'm happy
Yeah,
they
no,
went for it. I really,
and we
really
saw
am.
that actually running throughout the game again with Achilles.
Hmm.
He it was very awkward for him to go into town because, yeah,
He was
yet
bought.
he was at one point presumably a slave himself, and gained his freedom and this and that. So it was, while he had every right to be in town, it was still very awkward for him to be in town. Or even when Connor was working with Sam Adams, Connor straight up asked him,
Hmm.
he's like, "Why do you keep these people as slaves if you say to fight for freedom?" And Sam Adams was like, "Yeah, it kind of sucks, but we have more important things to worry about right now. We'll get to that when we have time for it." Like it was so awkward, but it was supposed to
Well,
be.
and then that's the thing. Like from a historian standpoint, right? A lot of these famous people that had slaves, and if anybody's gonna get bored, I'm sorry, but if you stuck with us, give me just a couple more minutes. Look at Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was a brilliant man, often hailed as one of the greatest founding fathers of this country, right? He owned slaves. And he was also pressed at the time when people would ask him about that, when he would talk about freedom and liberty and the fact that he owned slaves, he would always brush aside, we have more important things to do. And this became a very common theme among any of the high profile founders that happened to own slaves. And it became this thing where they kept trying to push it off, brush it off, push it off, brush it off, because they didn't want to deal with it. And it was very interesting to see sort of that kind of come over into this, right? So I was very happy to kind of see that a little bit, because that is historic fact. That is something that was, you can go through all of their writings and any lessons on them and see that those are topics that those important people did in fact brush off regularly, trying to talk about a grander scheme because they didn't want to talk about it at all.
Mhm. And it worked so well. Like I said, that
It did.
in the core concepts of the series of freedom of thought, freedom of action, and what many people look back as one of the greatest moments in history for that freedom, still had its own skeletons in the closet to deal with. And like I said, the way everything blended together between Connor's narrative and Desmond's narrative was very, very well handled. And it was a very good close to the proper Assassin's Creed series, because they always said they had these three main games and everything else just kind of built up around it, and now they're going with something new.
Right.
And we saw that something new.
I will agree with that. Yes, we did.
And how awesome was that something new?
All I have to know is when you open the trailer with Blackbeard talking about how badass and scary your pirate captain assassin character is going to be, you have my attention.
Well said. Because when I finished Assassin's Creed 3, the first thing I said was, okay, well, that was cool. The second thing I said was they need to take that engine that they used for the privateer segments and just make a pirate game out of it. It just Ubisoft, give me a pirate game. I will play it. I didn't think they were going to listen.
Well, the thing is, you're not the only one that said that. That has been something that people have been saying and saying and saying since stepping foot in the boat, minus anybody who's been seasick from, playing the game. But still, it's just the entire concept of having a game where I get to play as a fucking badass assassin pirate. Oh my god, I'm so excited for
But
this.
not only that, the pirate you're playing, because this game takes place early in the 18th century, several decades before Assassin's Creed 3, is Edward Kenway, the father of Haytham.
Yes.
So come to find out that Haytham, who was a Templar who we thought was an assassin at the beginning, his father was an actual assassin. I can't even begin to think where this storyline is going to go.
But that's going to be the
Oh
awesome part,
yeah,
right?
I'm glad.
That's good. Okay, so you have the father of a very incredibly badass character that you've already gotten to experience and play and sort of get to know and love and hate and feel very strong feelings about. And now you get his dad. And you have to wonder what happened there between father and son, because there's going to be something there that allowed sort of the brainwashing to sort of take place, right?
Mm-hmm.
There has to be something there. And that's what, like, I'm intrigued now. I'm intrigued to find where these points line up and where I can draw my line back. Oh god, it's gonna be awesome.
And I'm actually interested to see where they bring the modern day aspect of this into it, because
Who?
Desmond's off the board at this point.
Yes.
Now,
Well, as far as we know,
yeah,
Desmond's off the board.
the obvious choice would be Desmond's father, because it's all the same bloodline there, so that's a possibility. But somebody else also pointed out that they could go in a different direction with this, because in Assassin's Creed Liberation, the PS Vita game that came out, the modern day equivalent was an Abstergo agent
Yes.
who was basically using stolen memories to delve into that. So that's an option they could go with, and to see how this assassin character, led into the formation of a top Templar agent, that could be something that Abstergo would be very interested in learning about.
And also give us a very interesting dynamic, especially if we start opening up the fact that Abstergo has been stealing memories and implanting them and reliving them using the Animus process. There's no telling what we can actually get out of like storyline as far as like past and present and everything in between. it's such a cool concept. It really, really
Mm.
is.
And the one thing that I've always come back to with this series is I think it was Assassin's Creed 2 in when he goes down into the crypt, and I think it's when he gets
Mhm.
Altair's armor is what it was.
Yes.
And you had all the statues of all these other famous assassins in Egypt, in China, Japan, all these formative times throughout the world. And like I said, it gives the franchise so much freedom to go anywhere they want. And seeing how they meld this into it, because I don't want to just keep exploring this one bloodline over and over again because I think we're already stretching the limits of believability as to how many important historical moments can this one dude's granddad be involved with. So I'm hoping that this next game is going to give them the opportunity to branch out.
Which would be good for the franchise as a whole. Keep it
Mhm.
fresh.
And just kind of as a point of closure, how freaking awesome is Edward Kenway? Just look at you see him in the trailer and in the posters. Dude's got like 6 guns, 3 swords. This is an assassin designed by Rob Liefeld, but it makes
Without the weird
yeah,
anatomy.
but it makes such perfect sense because he's an assassin. He's a trained killing machine, but he's also a pirate. And with
Hmm.
all of the mystique that comes with that, and just a sheer force of intimidation, and wanting to have as much offensive capability around his body at any given time, because once you jump onto that other ship, you have no idea what's going to happen. You're not going to have time to reload your flintlock pistol. That just Edward's profile and visual storytelling in and of itself is enough for me.
Have you read any of the information that they've released on his biography?
No, very, very little.
Do you not want to have it
Oh,
spoiled
go
for you?
for it.
Okay, so here's the thing. The reason that he became a pirate actually has to do with his wife. So he marries Carolyn Scott, a woman who's older than him, and he has a daughter, which I'm sure this is going to be this is going to be important later. Jenny Kenway. Um, she kind of Carolyn kind of gets pissed at him because he can't find steady work, and she thinks he's not taking his responsibilities as a husband seriously. Though it was Edwards really his idea to sail as a privateer in the West Indies to try to bring back the fortune and gold. And while trying to do that, basically living up to his wife's expectations, trying to provide for his family and basically make his angry wife happy, that's what winds up destroying the marriage. So that's when he starts investing himself fully into the privateer life, right? So it's kind of cool to see where it's like his family is sort of splintered and broken, which can have very interesting ramifications for later games, or in truth, what's happening here. Because if he has a daughter and a son, there's more than one bloodline to follow now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the idea that this is what pushed him into becoming the privateer in the first place is really, really, really interesting. And there are some stuff that I'm purposely avoiding that revolves around him and Hatham's interaction that they did release when Hatham was a small child that helped push things along.
Uh,
Um, so I'm not going to ruin that part yet because I don't want to read it myself. But they do actually have a complete character biography available for Edward Kenway.
you are tempting me.
I know I found it by accident like 3 days ago. But it's just interesting to see the character already has that level of torment on top of everything else, but it never actually talks about how he becomes an assassin. Like they don't really
Right.
talk about that at all. So it's kind of what came first, the assassin or the privateer.
Very interesting. I'm only hoping
Yeah.
for one other thing in this game, and that is to see a young Achilles Davenport in his prime, because this would be about this
Yes.
right time period.
Well, yeah, that would definitely be about the right time
So
period.
if they can bring that in, Ubisoft, I thank you ahead of time because clearly you either listen to our shows or you're reading my mind because I don't know of any other way they could have come up with this game series or any of the developments therein because for both of us, the Assassin's Creed franchise has just been tailor made for all of our interests and all the things we find cool and awesome in life, in history, in our world, and brought it into what is our favorite storytelling medium of video games. And for that reason, above any other, Assassin's Creed will go down as probably one of my favorite game franchises of all time at this point.
Absolutely. It is up there with like the greats like Zelda. So I mean, to secure a spot in that sort of prestigious lineup that I have, congratulations. Also, the fact that they're doing such a wonderful job that I'm not sitting there yelling at my screen that this is wrong, this should not be happening. Do you ever read a fucking history book? So the fact that I'm not doing that, kudos, guys, because you're doing a wonderful job, and I can't wait to see what else comes out.
So, thanks for listening, watching, however you're consuming this particular episode. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube or keep following us on our website, internetdragons.tv. You can also find us on Twitter at internetdragons. And until next time, thanks for watching.
Bye, guys.